Alright guys, as I am in over 25 leagues on Underdog so far and in a couple of ESPN redraft leagues, I have identified the worst wide receiver picks in 2023 fantasy football. So we're just going to go ahead and get right into this, man. So first up is KADARIUS TONEY of the Kansas City Chiefs. Here's the thing. He's going as the wide receiver 38 on Underdog. Now, when you look at that price, it doesn't seem outrageous, right? It's not like that price is just super high for a guy who's done nothing yet. Well, to me, if you've done nothing to the NFL, if you've done really next to nothing or even nothing, you don't deserve to be going that high. And here's the point of it. These numbers I'm about to tell you guys are wild because I had to look them over again once I really saw them. Once I saw what he did with Kansas City, I had to look him over again because we all know that he started out in 2022 with the New York Giants still, and he was still dealing with injuries with them. He really didn't play much with the Giants in 2022, and then he got shipped to Kansas City mid-season. So I thought I remember him doing a lot more than he actually did. So these numbers were crazy to me. So in 2022 with Kansas City, he had 2.4 targets per game, 24.4 yards per game, and 5.5 fantasy points per game. So when I looked back on that, I just couldn't believe it was that low, right? And I understand that when you get traded, when there's a player that is this young and hasn't really done much in the NFL yet, when they get traded mid-season to a team, it's going to be a hard recipe to win. It's not like when San Francisco traded for Christian McCaffrey to be on their team, and Christian McCaffrey was already a very established player in this league. He didn't need development still. It's not like that. KADARIUS TONEY still needs development in the NFL, and it's really hard to go from team to team mid-season. So last video, I actually mentioned a couple of guys that I wouldn't mind you predicting injury for, because that is the reality. KADARIUS TONEY has been injured quite a lot. And the guys that I actually mentioned were Rashad Penny, Tua Tagovailoa, Keenan Allen. I think you can add KADARIUS TONEY to that list, actually, because look at the injury history that's on the screen right now. There have been so many, not only lower body injuries, but they do seem to fill it up. But there's been also just all kinds of weird injuries, man, that keep happening to KADARIUS TONEY in the NFL. So that's what I'm saying. You know, there's so many factors that are going into this, making him one of the worst wide receiver picks in fantasy football this year. And one of them is just because we haven't seen him at full strength yet, and it's hard to predict if we will. Now, let me say this. I get the intrigue with KADARIUS TONEY. I absolutely do. He's on the best offensive football with the best or one of the best offensive head coaches in the NFL. And you have the best quarterback throwing you the ball. But here's reality, guys. So last year, obviously, Kansas City won a Super Bowl, doing exactly what they did. And what they did last year was they shipped off Tyreek Hill. So they really have only one pass catcher established in that offense still, which is obviously Travis Kelce. So what they did was they spread the ball out way more than they ever have in Patrick Mahomes' career. And they had great success doing it. They ended up having 5 wide receivers with more than 30 targets in 2022. That should tell you something. They won a Super Bowl doing that, and they haven't yet. Maybe they get DeAndre Hopkins. I don't know. But they have not yet went ahead and made a big move at wide receiver in this offseason. And that leads me to my point. Even at this price, at the wide receiver 38, he's still a bad pick in fantasy drafts, man. Because here's the thing. We got to look at the guys going around him. So look at the wide receivers that are going around him. You've got Treylon Burks, Jordan Addison, George Pickens, Jahan Dotson, among many other guys, man. I would pick all 4 of those guys over KADARIUS TONEY. Moving on to our next wide receiver on the list, it is Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, man. So Chris Godwin, I haven't actually really talked about much yet this offseason. He's on a really bad team. I mean, we'll get into it in a minute. He's the wide receiver 29 on Underdog. So I would say for the most part, Chris Godwin is the type of guy who's viewed as a maybe higher end Deontay Johnson or Keenan Allen. All of those guys are great route runners. They all create separation, which means they're all target hogs in their offense. I would say that most people look at him as a higher end Deontay Johnson or Keenan Allen. Like I said, all of them are target hogs. Now the difference between Chris Godwin and Deontay Johnson versus Keenan Allen is entirely quarterback related, right? Keenan Allen obviously has the much better quarterback out of all of those guys. Keenan Allen has Justin Herbert, while Chris Godwin now has Baker Mayfield, and Deontay Johnson has Kenny Pickett. Now, I'll get back into Chris Godwin's quarterback situation in just a minute, so let's put that on the side. So while Tom Brady was still there, this is my point about this. Tom Brady there, Chris Godwin dropped in efficiency absolutely noticeably. It was a big drop. So in 2021, let's go through that season first. So he had 9.1 targets per game, 78.8 yards per game, 11.3 yards per reception, and 13.8 fantasy points per game. So 2021, pretty good season for a guy like Chris Godwin, right? That is not bad at all. Well, then when you look down to 2022, with Tom Brady still there, so he goes down to 2022, 9.5 targets per game, actually seeing a little bit more targets per game, 68.2 yards per game, 9.8 yards per reception, and 11.4 fantasy points per game. So if we notice the changes here, what we can take away from this is between 2022 and 2021, Chris Godwin was seeing more targets in this offense. Yet, he dropped in efficiency in every single category following. 10 less yards per game, almost 2 less yards per reception, and over 2 less fantasy points per game. So my point about this is, if that happened while there was a declining Brady still there, and to make it clear, obviously Brady was still declining, but he is still the greatest quarterback of all time. I don't want to see what happens with Baker Mayfield, but I can absolutely tell you what's going to happen. It's going to be a disaster. Because here's what we need to remember with quarterbacks specifically. Obviously, completion percentage is a massive piece to look at when you are evaluating quarterbacks for receivers, especially guys who are target hogs and really good route runners. These guys who have higher completion percentages are usually working out a lot better with these target hog route running wide receivers than very inaccurate guys. So Tom Brady in 2022, as up and down as he was, and we all know that, he had a 66.8% completion percentage. That is still a pretty decent number to have. So when you look at Baker Mayfield on the contrast, Baker was 60% completion percentage in 2022. Now you may say, well, he had a kind of a weird year. He had to shuffle from team to team during the season. Maybe it's not fair. Okay, maybe that's not fair. Let's go back to Baker's last season as a starting quarterback with the Cleveland Browns and see what he did. Maybe he did better. Now, he had a 60.5% completion percentage. So he's the same guy, guys. He is still inaccurate. He's still just not a good quarterback. It's going to be really bad. Because here's the wide receivers going around this range, guys. All of these guys have more upside to me. Brandon Ayuk, Christian Kirk, Hollywood Brown, Michael Pittman, and Jackson Smith-Njigba. I mean, I don't know, guys. Let me know in the comments if you would rather have Chris Godwin over any of those guys, and how you think Chris Godwin's going to finish this year. I think he's a terrible pick this year. Moving on to the next wide receiver on the list, it is QUENTIN Johnston of the Los Angeles Chargers. So he is the wide receiver 42 on Underdog. Now, many of you guys who watch my Dynasty content all offseason, you know how I feel about QUENTIN Johnston. I don't love the guy. I don't hate the guy. I just am lower on him than everybody else in the fantasy community when it comes to our Dynasty rookies. And while I believe he will get better in fantasy over time, I don't believe this is his year. There's reasons I don't love him as a player, and they're going to reveal themselves in a minute, so just hang on and let's enjoy the ride. So Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, first of all, they're the unquestioned number 1 and 2 in this offense with Justin Herbert. There is no question about that. And one of the other good things about this Los Angeles Chargers offense, and I think one of the reasons that people are so hyped about QUENTIN Johnston right away, is the Los Angeles Chargers are second in pass attempts in 2022 and were third in pass attempts in 2021. So they are a very pass-happy offense, right? So that should leave plenty of targets open for a wide receiver 3 who was drafted in the first round. So let's ask the question, who has been the wide receiver 3 in Los Angeles over the past 2 years, and what were they like in fantasy? Some of you may know this guy, but it's Josh Palmer. So Josh Palmer was a draft pick for them a couple of seasons back, and he has been serving as their primary wide receiver 3. So in 2022, here's what he did. 6.7 targets per game, 48.1 yards per game, 10.7 yards per reception, 8.3 fantasy points per game, and for the wide receiver 41 finish. Now that's a little bit disappointing, right? On an offense that is this pass happy, Why only the wide receiver 41 finish? And also, keep in mind, Keenan Allen was injured for most of the first half of the season, and Mike Williams was injured for 4 games. He missed 4 games in the last half of the season, while he also left early at another game in the back half of the season. So Josh Palmer had every opportunity to prove his worth, right? Now, obviously, the team drafts Quentin Johnston. He is a better player than Josh Palmer. I am not denying that fact. He's absolutely 100% a better player than Josh Palmer. But here's the thing. In reality, guys, Austin Ekeler is the wide receiver 3 in this offense. In 2022, he averaged 7.5 targets per game and 42.5 yards per game. So this offense loves and needs Austin Ekeler. Now, I understand that Austin Ekeler and the Chargers have had some back and forth this offseason about contract situations, and Austin Ekeler kind of sounds a little bit unhappy to be there right now, but the reality is he's still a great player, he's still a high character player, and he still wants to get paid if this is his last season, so he's not going to just let his foot off the gas. And the Chargers know that he is such a threat in the passing game, so he is going to continue to see so much work. So while Quentin Johnston very well may be on 70% of the offensive snaps in most weeks, I just don't see big upside in year 1 for Quentin Johnston. Now, ironically, my pro comp for him before he was drafted was actually Mike Williams with less jump ball ability, but better yards after the catch ability. They've already got Mike Williams on this roster, and with Austin Ekeler as that wide receiver 3, I just don't see a big year for Quentin Johnston, guys. I see a very slow year. And the guys going around him, they're guys like forget wide receivers for a minute, guys, because we need to realize who is going around him from other positions, because these other guys have way more upside. So he's got Dallas Goedert going around him. In my opinion, absolutely has the upside to finish as a top 3 tight end this year. George Pickens, absolutely love him. Jahan Dotson, DeAndre Swift, who I'm not a big fan of, but he does have an absolutely outstanding offensive line blocking for him. Isaiah Pacheco, same deal, and David Montgomery. I am not choosing Quentin Johnston over any of those guys. Again, let me know in the comments if you would do that, because to me, at this range, guys, we're looking for someone who maybe is a little bit more low risk and high reward type of player. That's not what Quentin Johnston is. And if you want to know who the ultimate low risk, high reward player is in 2023, click on this video right here.